Hello and welcome to the Toolkit for Traders YouTube channel, where we give you the tools for trading success. And we're on to our sixth installment of the MQL5 programming tutorial, so let's get started. So in the sixth edition of this course, we're looking at classes. This is a new concept. If you've done MQL4, the MQL4 course, or you're familiar with MQL4, you'll not be familiar with classes unless you've studied other object-oriented languages. So classes are something new to MQL5, and with it they bring quite a lot of functionality to the language. So in today's lesson, we'll be doing an introduction to object-oriented programming, and we'll be looking at what an object or class is, how we can create classes, and how we can use classes. So a quote for this lesson, specifically about object-oriented programming, is from David Gelernter. Object-oriented programming is based on real-world structures and gives programmers a powerful way to simplify the design and construction of complex programs. So before we get into classes and objects, the simplest way to think about classes and objects in MQL5 or in any language is the simplest way possible. Think of real-world objects that you're familiar with, a table, a car. These are objects that you can define. As a human, you know what they are, and object-oriented programming is just a way of defining in code objects. So let's have a look at that. So first, we'll do a quick recap on last lesson, which we covered logic. So let's have a look at that to remind ourselves. So we can use if-else operators to make decisions in our code, and we can give our expressions conditions to evaluate true or false. So we can use the equal to with two equal sign, the greater than sign, or the less than sign. We can use the greater than or equal to, combine the two there, or you can use the not equal to. And basically what we're trying to get to is a place where an expression will evaluate as true or false, and then the code will run in the true section or in the else section if the answer comes out as false. We can also combine conditions using the AND statement with the two ampersands, or we can use the OR statement with the two vertical lines. So with an AND statement, both sides of the AND have to be true for the whole thing to be true. If either of the sides are false, then the whole thing will be false. With an OR statement, only one side of the OR has to be true, and then the whole thing will evaluate as true. The only way that it will evaluate as false is if both sides are false at the same time. So quick reminder, if you like this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and add a comment. It's great if you do the first two steps, but a simple comment really helps with the YouTube algorithm. And also really encourages me to do that. So write anything you like, keep it friendly, keep it above board, but write a short little comment. And if there's any questions you have, feel free to do that, and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. So now we're getting to the meat of the lesson, which is classes and objects. So let's have a look. So classes and objects. Classes and their objects are one of the most exciting advancements of MQL4 to MQL5, as we've said before. Object-oriented program can be difficult to grasp at first. It is tricky if you think about it from a programming side first, but if you think of it in terms of real-life objects, it becomes quite intuitive and really helps organize your code. Take time with this one. It's key for MQL5. It's how we use indicators, and indicators used in a very different way in MQL5 because of the use of classes. So this is one of the key concepts you need to grasp if you're going to use indicators in your expert advisors. So the first thing we need to know is, what are classes? So suppose you want to build cars in the real world. You first need to design the car. That is, you need to choose what components it has, and you need to say what the car does. So you need a blueprint, which we've got the picture on the right. You need a blueprint for what a car is and what it looks like. So we build the blueprint of what the car should look like and what it should do, and then we can manufacture them in the future. You have one blueprint for a car, and then you can produce multiple cars from that single blueprint. And that's an analogy that's really useful for looking at classes. So you can think of classes as the blueprint for any object that you'll make in your code. Your class will set out what the object that you're going to make should look like. You'll also have functions that will define what that object can do. And then you can create multiple objects from that blueprint with different attributes within it. So again, we come back to the car analogy, and you want to build a car, the first thing you need to design. So we need to define the components, so the number of wheels, the number of seats. We can also define the states of the car, so the speed of the car, the current gear the car has, and the headlights are on. And already you can see speed might be in a double, the current gear might be an integer, and the headlights on might be a true or false situation. These are class variables for that class, and they hold information common to all cars. But as we covered in the previous lesson, we need to say what types of variables they are. So again, we've got int for the number of wheels, int for the number of seats, and we've got double, int, boolean for the speed, current gear, and headlight, respectively. Before we move on, we need to also say, when we're talking about classes, we need to say whether these variables are public, private, or protected. So these are new phrases you won't have heard, but they're quite important across many programming languages, including MQL5. So public, private, and protected is something called encapsulation. And when we give a variable to a class, we need to say whether it is a private variable, a public variable, or a protected variable. So a public variable you'll use, and this can be used anywhere else in the code. So it can be accessed by any other part of the code. It can refer to it. It's pretty intuitive. It's public, so it can be publicly accessed, right? If you think about a car, what's publicly accessed? Well, you can see if the headlights are on, and you can see if how many wheels it's got. Protected encapsulation can only be accessed within the class. So within the class itself, the functions of the object can access those variables. So this might be the number of seats, the speed on the tachometer, the current gear. These are things you can see within the car. So they're not publicly available, they're not publicly accessible. You can't change them from other parts of your code. You can only look at them, you can only change them from within the car. You'll generally only use public or protected. You can use private. I'm not going to go into it just now. I don't want to overcomplicate, but let's just stick with these two, protected and public, for now. So we've designed the information we need to build our car. We now look at what the car does. So we can now define some public methods or functions for what the car does. So we have a void. We've given out a void function here, which says to speed up. We have a boolean to change gear. So void means when you run that function, what are you going to get back from the function? If you say void, you're not going to get anything back from the function. Boolean change gear is going to potentially tell us whether we successfully changed the gear or not. And if we did, we might get a true. If we didn't, we will get a false. And we've got a turn left function method that we've added here as well. And this might be a double, so it might be the number of degrees with a decimal place that we've been able to turn left. Now we've defined these in our class, so you can see here we've defined our class for the car. We've given our class the name. I've in this case used the name capital C to define the class and then the name of it. So again, we've used something that's easily readable. We've got curly brackets, which you'll be familiar with from the function and the if-else statements. And then we've got the protected statement and the public statement. We've got our variables here, and then we've got our public methods here. We can, of course, have protected methods, and they would be only accessible from within the class itself. So now we've decided the information we need to build our car, we can look at actually defining the function. So here we haven't actually said what these functions are going to do. All we've done is declare that these functions exist. So we're just saying, hey compiler, heads up, we're going to make some functions that are going to be called these things and are going to return this information, this type of information. So then below our declaration of the class, so we do that, we then can write a function very similar to how we did in the previous function episode. We're going to say what type of information we're going to return. And here's a slightly different bit. Rather than just declare the name of the function, we're going to link this to the car class. And the way we do that is we write the name of the class that we're going to have, ccar, 2 colons here as a kind of chain that links this function to the class. And then we're going to say change gear. So we're going to define the change gear function here. And this change gear function is going to have an integer, which is p gear. So we're going to put an input here, which is an integer, and we're going to say the gear that we want. And we're also going to set a default to be 1. So if the user doesn't set, or the coder doesn't set a gear, then it'll automatically be the number 1. Curly brackets again, and then we can say current gear is equal to the p gear, and we can return true. So really simple, just for a display purposes really here. But this function doesn't really tell us a lot, but you can see that the script that we're running goes within these curly brackets and is run linked to the car class that it's attached to. We also need a constructor function. So we have a blueprint, and when we go to create one of our cars from the blueprint, we need a function that tells the computer how to build that car. What will be the initial variables, the values of those variables that we need. So here we have, again, we create a function like we did before, but we call it the same name. The function is the same name as the class, and that tells the system it's a constructor. We put void in here because we're not putting any inputs, and then we're going to curly brackets again. We're going to set a default. We're going to set an initial gear, right? When we make the car off the factory floor, we want it to be in first gear. So we set that current gear to be 1, and we set the current speed to be 0 because it's going to be stationary once it's made and it's not moving yet. So that's how you build constructors. Now, MQL will automatically build constructors, so you don't necessarily need to put these into your code. But you can put them in if you want to set specific variables to start with when you're using it. So we've covered classes, and hopefully you followed along, classes being like blueprints. So now we get to the bit where we can use the classes within our code, and we use them by creating objects from the blueprint. So now we have a blueprint for a car. We can now make a car, or we can make multiple cars. So we can now we say what type of information. So where before we're creating a variable, we would put double int string here. We're now going to define it as, we're going to tell the computer, this is going to be of the car class type. So we're going to create a car class object, and we're going to name that shiny new car. We can also create multiple cars, so we can have another class object, and we can call this a really fast car. So we can have 2 objects from the same blueprint which will have the same functionality, but they can have different internal attributes and they're different objects. So you can see how this might be useful. Say, for instance, you've got 2 moving average indicators on your chart. Both of them are using the same code. So instead of the person writing the indicator having to write that code multiple times, you can reuse that code with one class and have multiple objects that have different variables within them. So we've got our really fast car. So the object type here, just to recap, just like in variables, we're setting up as the car class, and we're telling the blueprint for the code is a car class we've already defined. We've given it a name, and again, we've used a name that is unique, but also understandable, right? Shiny new car, really fast car. You already understand a bit about what these objects are and maybe how they're different. When you name the car object, the constructor function executes automatically. So our car is now ready to roll. So that constructor function we made will have been run. And now we can use the methods, the functions of the objects to do different things with them. So we can say to the shiny new car, we use the dot to access its functions, and we can say, hey, speed up with the function that's in there. We can say to the really fast car, change gear, and we want to go to gear 2. So we can use the functions we defined. Notice that we've got the one full stop here to access the functions that are part of that class. So now we need to know why if we have an understanding of what classes are, what objects are, why is that important, and how can we use them in MQL5? So in MQL5, we can use classes to represent and use indicators. So this is one of the key ways that you'll use classes. There are other ways, and we will cover them in this series. But classes, one way that many people would be interested in is that they're really heavily used when we're talking about indicators. So here we have, we're creating a class here. We've used a declaration. We're calling our class C indicator. We've got a protected declaration first. We're going to have an integer variable within there, which is the handle. Think of handle like the ticket number for that indicator. It's a unique number, so we can get back to that indicator if we need to. We've got a double here, which is an array. We've not covered arrays yet, but we will. But we've got the main buffer, the main list of numbers. So if you think about the simple moving average, what is it? It is basically, when you look at the chart, it's a line. How is that line made? Well, there's just a series of numbers with decimal places, so doubles that are then joined together visually with a line. So it's just like a chart or a graph you might have made at school. So this is a list of those numbers running from the most recent to the least recent. Then we have some public variables here, some public functions, in fact. So we have a function that will return a double, and that is the main function. So we will say cIndicator.main, and we'll input this shift as an integer. So in many indicators, you'll get the option to put a shift in there, as in the number of bars back in time you want to go to get your data, which is really useful. So that is the function that publicly we will use to get the data from the indicator. The actual data is stored here, and it is protected so that you don't get any fiddling with it, or you don't get any messing with that data that you did not want, and you did not want when you wrote the code. We have the public function to help us access that data without messing things up. We also have a void release function. So this is to get rid of the indicator when we're finished with it. So we clear all the data, make sure our computer runs fine and doesn't have lag in the background because something else is running. And we've also got a constructor function that we will use. So again, we've covered a really tricky topic. I hope the analogy has helped you understand what classes and objects are. If you're not fully understanding it, don't worry. We're going to go to the MetaEditor now, and we're going to use an example with our expert advisor that we've been developing. So we've come over to our MetaEditor now. If you're in MetaTrader, press F4, or press the IDE button at the top, and you'll come to our MetaEditor. So we have what we built in the last lesson, which is our spread checker. And what we're going to do now is we're going to use classes to reorganize this code and make the most out of it. So we'll click File, we'll save as, and we'll call this one Lesson 6. So we've got a copy of the last one, and we can edit this one without ruining the hard work we put into the last one. So to recap on what we did last time, we used if-else function to display different comment messages within the window of MetaTrader. We had a function here called calculate spread, and then we passed that into our spread message and changed that spread message depending on whether the spread was above the maximum spread we set as an input. Great. So now we're going to reorganize this, and we're going to introduce some class or a class. So we'll go to our where we're defining our input variables, and we might also define global variables here. And we're going to comment a little section here just to divide it up and make it easy to see. So we've got that. We're going to have a section here where we're going to create our classes just to keep it organized. So the first thing we use is the class declaration. So we're telling the computer, hey, we're going to create a class. We're going to use the capital C. You don't have to use the capital C, but this is purely just so that it's understandable when you're reading your own code. So we're going to call this our spread checker object. And then we're going to define what that looks like down here. So the first thing we need to do is we need to have our private declaration. So our encapsulation here, and under that statement, we'll tab in and we'll have a double, which is our spread variable, and we'll have our string, which is our spread message. So you'll be familiar from the last lesson of using these, but now we're using them in a class. We're also going to have a public statement here, and we're going to have a constructor function, which is void C spread checker, and we're going to have a string returned function as part of this class, which is the check spread function. We're going to put in here some inputs. So we're going to have a double, which is pbid, and a double, which is pask. And that is going to be our spread checker function. So now that we've defined what our class looks like, what our objects are going to look like, we now need to define these functions down here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say void, and we're going to match the type returned on the constructor. We're going to say C spread checker. I'm going to use the link, the chain link to them, and you can see the helper already recognizes that we've got two functions that we defined. So we can press return and create that one. So what we're going to do when we create the spread checker, we're simply going to set our spread message to be a blank string. So whenever the EA is created, then that's going to be blank. We're then going to create the second function, which is using our spread checker, link it with the two colons, and then we'll define the second one. And already we press return, and the MetaEditor IDE has already filled out the inputs for us because they've been predefined. So we're going to use the input parameters to calculate the bid ask spread. So we've got a comment there explaining what we're doing, and so let's define what this function does. So we're going to first of all calculate our spread. So we can use our spread variable as part of the class, and we can set that to be our input ask minus our input bid, and we can define that as we did before by the point variable. Divide that so that we get it into a number that's above 0, and because that's what we're used to. And then we're going to change the message in the window depending on the size of the spread. So just taking time to comment so we all follow what we're doing. So we're going to use that if statement again. We're going to say if the spread is greater than the max spread, which is our input, we will, and we're going to use an inbuilt function here to concatenate our string. Now, if you're not familiar with string concatenation, it just purely means we're going to join together multiple strings. So as an input, we can put multiple strings out and it will join them up together. So we're going to have our spread message, and we're going to concatenate that with alert. The spread message, when we use this string concatenate function, just to show you that quickly, the first string you put in is the string you're going to form. The next two the next arguments, or the next multiple arguments, and you can have 63 as the maximum. It will be joined together, and then they will be put into the variable that you put in the first spot, the first parameter. So our spread message, we're going to fill our spread message with the following. We're going to say alert, the spread is greater than the maximum allowable spread. Put a space there, close that string, and then we're going to add another parameter into this, and we're going to set double to string, which is a function we used before, and we're going to put in here our spread with a 0 decimal places. So now that we've got that, if the spread is not greater than, we can put what we want in the next one. So we can use the same function again. We can concatenate that. We can then fill our spread message variable with the following. The current spread is, and then we can say double to string again, and we'll put in our spread, and we'll set that to 0 decimal places. So we've got two different messages depending on whether the spread is above the maximum. We're then going to return, because you see here we've got to return a string. So we're going to return, and then we're going to return our spread message, which we've concatenated and filled with what we wanted. And that ends that function as part of that. There. So the next thing we're going to do now, so we've defined what our class is going to look like. We've defined what the functions of that class will do. We now need to create an instance of that. So we're going to create a spread checker class. We're going to say, hey computer, we're going to make one of those spread checkers I just defined. I'm going to call it spread checker. Highly imaginative name, I know. And we're just going to define that. So let's compile that so we get errors, and we get a void name expected. So we've got an error. So let's have a look at that. So looking here, okay, so one thing you do have when you define a class is you do have to put a semicolon after, if I remember right, which is different from functions and if-else statements. So as a commonplace that you may trip up on, you see here we've defined a function, we've used if-else statements, we've not put a semicolon after those curly brackets. Well, then when you define a class, you do. So that's just one of those things you have to look for. So we've got rid of that issue there. So now we can move on to what we're going to do. So we're coming down here, the init function. We're not going to do anything when the expert advisor starts. We're not going to do it when it de-inits for the moment. And then we've got our tick function. So now we can actually simplify this because we don't need this function here. We've rewritten that. And we don't need a lot of this. So we're going to actually just get rid of what we did before because we've rewritten most of it within our class. And we're just going to say double bid. So we're going to create a variable, and we're going to retrieve the bid and ask price. So we're going to say the current symbol using the underscore symbol, and we're going to use the enumerated bid, which we covered in a previous lesson, to get the bid price. We're going to use the same thing to get the ask. This time, you saw that other lesson, you'll also know that I made the mistake of putting bid in the ask, and so we ended up with 0. So we're going to use ask. We definitely use ask. It is ask, and we'll get that right this time. We're going to create a message variable to hold our message, and that's going to be a string. And we're going to fill that with, we're going to use our spread checker. So you see now, just go back to that. We write spread checker, and you can see the MetaEditor recognizes we've got an instance of spread checker. Do you want to use that? Because it matches what you've been typing. Yes, I would. I'll press return. I can now press the full stop, and that will bring up the functions that the spread checker has. And you can see we've got the constructor function, which is the first one. And if I press down, I've got the check spread function, which is the one we want. Now I've got to put in the two parameters, and you can see the helper is now showing me the parameters that I need, which is two doubles. I can put in the bid, I can put in the ask, and I can press the semicolon here. And now we can comment, finally use the comment function to put our message on the screen. So we'll save that, compile that. We've got no errors. So you see how that looks much simpler as a piece of code than what we had before within our tick function. We're using the check spread as part of our spread checker object, and we've compiled that. So now we can go into MetaEditor again. We can go to our expert list. We're going to remove the one from the previous lesson. Doink. And we're going to look for our lesson 6. So let's load that up. Our inputs are set, and we'll press OK. So here you can see it's working now. The message is changing when the spread goes above 5. It's functioning exactly the same as before, but this time we are using classes and objects. So we come back to the meta editor now, and there's one last thing, a bit of a bonus for this video that we're going to do, which we're going to look at something called an include file. So if you imagine if you're writing your expert advisor and you've got classes running through, your code's going to start to get pretty big and pretty messy quite soon. One nice thing you can do is we can take this whole section of code out and put it somewhere else. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to go up here to New. We're going to create an include file here, .mqh. And we're going to give this the name spread checker. And I'm going to give the name spread checker 2 because I've already made this when I was preparing for this video. So I'm just going to give it a slightly different name just for that. And this will, again, uses the information you had in there before. And it's got some comments. They're all commented out, so they don't actually do anything for now. So we can just get rid of all of that and return that, which I've just deleted for some reason. And then we can take all that section of code here from the class declaration. In fact, we'll take the word classes as well. We'll take that all out and we'll pop that into our spread checker class. So now we've got it all in here. We can click save. We can compile this. And we've got an issue that our max spread is not within the declaration here, right? We've not got the global variable for max spread in here. So what we need to do to bring this in here is we're just going to add a variable here, which is going to be our max spread parameter. Sorry, we're going to add that in. We're going to save that, and we just need to change this to p max spread. So we'll save that here, and also we need to change the definition in the class as well. Excuse me. Right, have we done it? Have we done it? There we go. So we've got this spread checker 2, which has taken all that information we just wrote and we put it into a separate include file. So now we come back to our main file here. Now, interestingly, now if we press compile, the first thing is we are going to get a bunch of errors. So C spread checker, it doesn't know what seed spread checker is because we've not defined it anywhere here. So what we need to do here is we need to include the C spread checker sheet, the include sheet spread checker 2 onto here. So what we're going to do underneath our property declarations is we're going to have another declaration similar to that with the hashtag include, and then we're going to use the pointy brackets, and we're going to say spread checker 2 dot mqh, and then we're going to close that there, and we're going to put on there a semicolon for good measure. So we'll compile that and we get rid of some of those. There you can see our spread checker 2 mqh file is now loaded in. But the check spread has got the wrong parameter count, and that's because when we defined it, we had to add the max spread. So now we can put our input in here into our parameters when we do that. So you remember we added the max spread in here. We're now going to use the max spread that was our input. We're going to pop it into the function for the spread checker. We're going to save that and compile that. And we now have no errors. We're going to go to our MetaEditor. And again, the EA is still working, showing the correct spread, which is 4 currently. If we go to the expert list and we change it to 2, we now get a alert message because our tolerance is much lower. And that's what we're going to cover in the terminal today. So now that you watched the video, what should you do next? As we've said before, the best thing for you to do is to copy this EA that we've written from scratch or amend what you've been doing after the last lesson. Really set aside the time to write this EA out yourself. Don't just watch the video and think you know it, because the first time you sit down to code an EA yourself, it's going to feel like you know nothing. You've got to get your hands, your brain, everything about you familiar with writing code. So the best way to do that initially is just to copy what I've done and make some small changes where you recognizing that you understand the patterns. Feel free to experiment, but definitely don't just copy this, load it onto your computer and think that's done. You've got to take it right out yourself. Get used to putting in semicolons, get used to putting in curly brackets, get used to doing all those things. Copy it out and you'll learn a lot faster, trust me. If you can't get it over to work, you can go over to toolkitfortraders.com and get the full code you've done so far. But only do that if you're struggling and you want to cross comparison and compare. I recommend you watch this video again and type it out as you go, pausing where you need to pause. And if you have any questions or any queries, bang it in the comment section below and I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can, or I'm sure someone else from an amazing community will do the same. So in the next video, what we're going to be looking at, number 7 in the series, we'll be repeating ourselves. And by that, I mean, we will be looking at loops. What are loops? What are loops? Well, loops are bits of code that repeat themselves, that go over and over again until you stop them. Many crashes on computers are caused by loops, so it's important we get them right. We're also going to look at arrays, which I mentioned in this video very briefly, but we'll look at that properly. Arrays are lists, but in coding we call them arrays for some reason. And we're going to find a better way to find and close our orders using arrays in the next video as well. So that's all we got for today. Join me next week for the next video, and I'll see you all soon. Have a safe and lovely week. Bye.